Alright, YouTube, it's time for Occult Literature video number 82, The New Atlantis by Francis Bacon. Interesting work, fairly short, 46 pages. It's a semi-utopian work, and it's based loosely, let's say, off Plato's account of Atlantis. Plato left his account unfinished, possibly for dramatic effect. Possibly he was interrupted while writing it, maybe he lost interest. We're not exactly sure. This is similar in that it does stop unexpectedly in the meat and bones of the actual story. It's probably a tip of the hat to Plato. And Francis Bacon's New Atlantis, like City of the Sun or some of these other utopian-style writings from then or thereafter, or back into antiquity, posits essentially a scenario in which you've got a Christian society, as opposed to maybe Plato's society of antiquity, you would say. A society that's based on a more pure understanding of spirituality in the Christian sense. Now, as always, link in the description to where you can purchase my edition of this work off of Amazon. Second link to my books blog. It's been reorganized, it's been reformatted. There are 8 categories there. You can navigate it much more easily now. As far as this work goes, I think the most interesting thing in it is really predictive. It's almost like prophecy in a Christian sense. Francis Bacon posits the future existence or then quasi-fictional existence of a society which has, for instance, human flight, which of course now is the case. New types of gunpowder, which of course were developed several centuries later, smokeless powder, modern gunpowder you'd call, as opposed to black powder. Advanced optics, advanced microscopy, and so forth. A lot of certainly medicine and so forth, the feeding of diseases, the breeding of different animals and plants of various qualities, soil science. These are all spoken of in his work. Most of these things were not considered to be valid science at the time. During this sort of period of time, most of this was considered either out of man's capability, permanently or for a long period of time. I guess they saw the future, and they saw basically the way people in the Victorian era saw the future. They saw it as being a bunch of brass valves and gear systems, and people back in the Renaissance saw it as clockwork and black powder. He went a little bit past this, and some of the predictions that he makes in a veiled manner turn out to be remarkably true, actually. Ultimately, you're sort of looking at a brief description of the world as we have it today, which is very, very interesting. The second component that I identify is alchemical. That is specifically towards the end of the work, when he's talking about some of the activities of the scientists of this mythological society of Ben Salam or Ben Salem. It's talking about what essentially relate to a brief description of alchemical subjects, that is distillation and ascension and so forth, talking about carving out places in mountains where humidification and mortification and these things can be staved off or manipulated in some way. It's a very alchemically inspired text. I have to believe that Bacon was acutely aware of far older writings within alchemy to be speaking this way, because it's almost verbatim from the alchemists, specifically maybe something like the Rosary of the Philosophers. So we do have what is here a text inspired by a Christian-leaning style of occultism, that is alchemy, which at that time was losing favor, beginning to lose favor, rather. We're talking about the 1600s here. It was losing favor, and it was increasingly seen as acceptable within Christian circles to speak of it, as opposed to maybe in the past, where it could have been heretical, could have gotten you burned as a witch. By this time, maybe not so much. The Enlightenment wasn't that far off in this era, but some of the predictions that he makes, within the context of a fictional story, not actually calling them predictions, it almost looks like this work is really more of an occult manuscript, speaking about human purification in both the Christian and alchemical sense, coupled with his own predictions that he simply happened to write in the form of a fictional sort of story. That being said, even the story itself is quite interesting, if relatively short again. So it's definitely recommended reading. If you're interested in alchemy, you'd probably like this. Certainly, if you're interested in Atlantis, this is a must-read. If you're interested in seeing a little bit of the secondary intelligences by, I believe, Trithemius had a similar vein of predictive quality to it as this work. Certainly by the middle of the 1900s, most of the things he's talking about were not only no longer seen as anti-scientific, they were seen as for granted. Yes, we can do this. Yes, we can look at these little things with a microscope. Yes, it is possible for man to fly in a balloon, in a plane, whatever, a blimp, whatever happens to be the case. He talks about submersibles and not the primitive diving bells that were being used in the era. You know, literally a bell with a window on it. You can go underwater and you can have an air pocket there and be down there for a little while. But submersibles that are actually capable of moving, these wouldn't take hold until like the era of the Merrimack and the Monitor sort of era, the ironclad era, and thereafter. With some of the more modern, let's say, things that we have now, I think they're a little bit more advanced than they were back then, back when they were all rusted out and trying to fire like a rudimentary cannon out of the top. But yes, it's very interesting work. Again, link in the description to where you can purchase my edition of this work. Second link to my books blog. Much improved over how it was before. That's about all. Peace out.